The small wooden horse trembled in Tommy's 7-year-old hands as he approached the tall rancher outside Murphy's general store. The paint had faded to a dull brown, and one ear was chipped from years of play, but it was all he had left. "Mister," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the Montana wind. "My little sister hasn't eaten in 3 days. Will you buy my toy?" Jake Morrison stopped dead in his tracks. The grocery bags in his hands suddenly felt weightless compared to the crushing weight of those words. He looked down at the boys standing before him, dirty clothes hanging loose on a too-thin frame, hollow cheeks that spoke of hunger, and eyes that had seen far too much for someone so young. But it was the way the child clutched that wooden horse, knuckles white with desperate hope, that hit Jake like a punch to the gut. "Son, what did you just say?" Jake asked, his voice catching in his throat. He set his bags down on the wooden sidewalk and knelt to the boy's level. Up close, he could see the grime on the child's face, the way his lips were cracked from dehydration, the tremor in his small hands. Tommy took a shaky breath. "My horse. Papa gave it to me for Christmas. It's a good horse, see?" He held it up with both hands like an offering. "The mane's a little loose, but it still looks like a real one. Will you please buy it? I need money for food. For Lily. She's real hungry." Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't right. Children shouldn't be alone, shouldn't be trying to sell their toys for food. "Where are your parents, son? Where's home?" The boy's face crumpled for just a moment before he forced it back into that awful, grown-up composure. "They're gone. Car went off the road 2 weeks back in the rain. Me and Lily, we've been taking care of ourselves, but the food ran out and..." His voice broke. "She won't stop crying. She keeps asking for Mama." Jake felt the world tilt beneath him. 2 weeks. These children had been alone for 2 weeks. He thought of his own loss 3 years ago, Sarah and their unborn baby, taken in a flash of twisted metal and broken dreams. But at least he'd been a grown man. These were babies, facing the world with nothing but each other. "Where's Lily now?" Jake managed to ask, though his throat felt tight as a fist. "Over there." Tommy pointed toward the far end of the parking lot, where an old sedan sat tilted on a flat tire. Through the dusty back window, Jake could make out a tiny figure slumped in the back seat. "She don't like strangers, so I told her to wait. But she's getting real weak, mister. I don't know what to do anymore." Jake stood slowly, his knees protesting. At 45, he thought he'd seen everything this hard country could throw at a person. He'd buried his parents, lost his wife and child, and spent 3 years learning to live with the kind of emptiness that echoed in his chest like wind through a broken barn. But this tiny boy, offering up his most precious possession to save his sister, was breaking something inside him that he'd thought was already shattered beyond repair. "What's your name, son?" "Tommy. Tommy Peterson. And that's Lily over there. She just turned 4 last month, but we didn't have no cake." He wiped his nose on his sleeve, leaving a streak through the dirt on his face. "Will you buy my horse? Please? It's a real good horse. Papa said it was carved by his grandpa in the old country." Jake reached into his wallet, but Tommy shook his head violently. "No, mister. I ain't begging. I'm selling. Fair and square. Papa always said Peterson men work for what they get." The pride in the boy's voice, even starving and desperate, nearly undid Jake completely. "All right, Tommy. Fair and square." Jake pulled out a $20 bill, far more than any toy was worth, but not nearly enough for what this child was offering. "But first, I want to meet Lily. Can you show me?" Tommy's eyes went wide at the sight of the money, but he nodded quickly. "She might hide it first. She's scared of grown-ups now, but she's real sweet, I promise." They walked across the cracked asphalt together, Jake's boots echoing loud in the afternoon quiet. The closer they got to the car, the more Jake could see the desperate signs. Empty food containers scattered in the front seat, a blanket that looked like it had been salvaged from somewhere, and through the back window, a little girl so small and still that for a terrible moment, Jake feared they were too late. But then she moved, turning her head toward them with eyes too big for her thin face. She had the same dark hair as Tommy, but where his was matted and unkempt, hers had been carefully braided. Tommy's work, Jake realized. The boy had been trying to take care of her the only way he knew how. Lily, Tommy's voice went soft and gentle. I found someone who wants to buy my horse. We're going to get you some food, okay? The little girl's gaze moved from Tommy to Jake, and she shrank back against the far door. But she didn't cry, didn't make a sound. Just watched with those enormous eyes that held too much sadness for any child to carry. Jake felt something crack open in his chest, something he'd kept locked away since the day they'd lowered Sarah's coffin into the ground. These children needed more than food. They needed safety, protection, a chance to be children again instead of survivors clinging to each other in the wreckage of their world. Tommy, he said quietly, how would you feel about coming home with me? Just for tonight. We can get Lily some food, maybe a bath and clean clothes. And you can keep your horse. Tommy's face went through a dozen emotions. Hope, fear, suspicion, and back to that heartbreaking adult wariness. Why would you do that? What do you want from us? It was a fair question. Jake knelt down again, meeting both children's eyes. 3 years ago, I lost someone real important to me. Since then, I've been living alone on my ranch, just going through the motions. But seeing you two, seeing how you're taking care of each other. He paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound empty. Sometimes people come into your life when you need them most. Maybe that's what's happening here. Tommy looked at his sister, then back at Jake. The wooden horse was still clutched in his hands, worn smooth by countless hours of play and love. You promise you won't split us up? People tried before, said Lily should go with a family and I should go somewhere else. But I can take care of her. I've been doing good so far. You've been doing amazing, Jake said, and meant it. But you shouldn't have to do it alone anymore. The drive to Jake's ranch passed in tense silence. Tommy sat in the front seat, still clutching his wooden horse, while Lily curled up in the back with a blanket Jake kept for emergencies. Every few minutes, Tommy would turn around to check on his sister, his young face creased with worry that belonged on someone decades older. Jake's ranch house sat at the end of a long dirt road, surrounded by rolling hills and endless sky. It was a simple place, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that opened into a living room where dust motes danced in the afternoon light. He built it with Sarah back when they planned to fill it with children's laughter. Now it echoed with the hollow sound of a man living alone. It's not much, Jake said as he helped Lily out of the truck. She weighed almost nothing, like a bird in his arms. But it's warm and safe. Tommy stayed close to his sister as they entered the house. His eyes darted everywhere, checking exits, memorizing the layout, ready to run if needed. Where do we sleep? He asked, that careful politeness masking his fear. You can have my room tonight. I'll take the couch. Jake set Lily down gently on the sofa, where she immediately curled into a tight ball. But first, let's get some food in you both. The refrigerator revealed the sparse eating habits of a man who'd forgotten how to care about meals. Some leftover roast, eggs, milk that was still good, bread that would toast up fine. Jake started simple, scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy but warm and filling. As the butter sizzled in the pan, he watched Tommy hover near Lily, smoothing her hair with gentle hands. She likes her eggs soft, Tommy said quietly. Not runny, but not hard either. And she don't eat the crusts on bread. Got it. Jake's throat felt tight. This boy had been memorizing his sister's preferences, trying to be mother and father and brother all at once. What about you? How do you like your eggs? Tommy shrugged. Don't matter much. I eat whatever Lily don't finish. When Jake set the plates down, both children stared at the food like they couldn't quite believe it was real. Lily picked up her fork with shaking hands, took a tiny bite, then another. Tears started rolling down her cheeks as she ate, silent and steady. Hey, it's okay, Jake said softly, sitting across from them. You're safe now. Eat as much as you want. Tommy ate with quick, efficient bites, but kept watching Lily, ready to give her his food if she wanted more. It was only after his sister had cleaned her plate that he allowed himself to finish his own meal. "Can we have some more?" Tommy asked, shame coloring his voice. Of course. Jake made another batch, then another. He'd never seen children eat with such desperate hunger, such careful gratitude. With each bite, some color returned to their faces, some life to their eyes. After dinner, Jake ran a bath. Lily was too weak to wash herself, so Tommy helped her, his movements gentle and practiced. Jake found some of his old t-shirts that would work as nightgowns, and when the children emerged from the bathroom, clean and wrapped in towels too big for their small frames, something shifted in the house. It felt less empty, less like a tomb of old memories. "Tommy," Jake said as he tucked them both into his bed, Lily already half asleep against her brother's side. "Can you tell me what happened?" "After the accident." The boy was quiet for so long that Jake thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, in a whisper barely audible over Lily's soft breathing, Tommy began to talk. "We was driving to Colorado. Papa heard there was work picking apples, good money for the harvest season. We didn't have much, but we had each other, you know. Papa would sing while he drove, and Mama would laugh at his bad jokes." Tommy's voice caught. The rain came so fast. Papa tried to slow down, but the truck in front of us jackknifed, and we couldn't stop in time. Jake closed his eyes, seeing it too clearly, the terror, the impact, the awful aftermath. "I woke up in the hospital," Tommy continued. "Had a big bandage on my head, and this lady was asking me questions. She said Mama and Papa went to heaven, and that me and Lily would go to nice families. But different families, 'cause not many people want 2 kids. His arms tightened around Lily. "I heard her talking in the hallway. Said we was hard to place together, so you ran." That night, Lily was scared, but I told her we was going on an adventure. We walked back to where they towed our car, and I got our clothes and some crackers Mama had packed. Been living there since, drinking water from the gas station bathroom, eating what I could find. Tommy turned his face into the pillow. I tried so hard to take care of her, but she kept getting thinner and crying at night for Mama. I didn't know what else to do. Jake's hands clenched into fists. 2 weeks. These babies had survived 2 weeks on their own, sleeping in a broken car, living on scraps because the system would rather split them up than keep them together. "You did amazing, Tommy. You saved your sister's life, but I couldn't save theirs." The words came out broken, raw with a grief too big for a 7-year-old to carry. If I'd been bigger, stronger, maybe I could have helped Papa steer or warned him about the truck or something. Jake's own grief, carefully buried for 3 years, surged up like a tide. "Listen to me, son. Sometimes bad things happen, and it's nobody's fault. Not yours, not your papa's, not God's. It just is. All you can do is keep going, keep taking care of the people you love." He thought of Sarah, of their unborn daughter they'd planned to name Hope, of all the nights he'd tortured himself with what-ifs and if-onlys. These children had dragged him back into the world of the living, reminded him that sometimes love meant showing up even when your own heart was broken. A soft knock at the front door made them both freeze. Tommy sat up, instantly alert, his hand moving protectively over Lily. "Stay here," Jake whispered, but Tommy was already climbing out of bed. "If it's the police, I'm taking Lily out the back window." "Tommy, wait, Dash." But the boy was already moving, lifting his sleeping sister with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this before. Through the window, Jake saw a patrol car in his driveway, and his heart sank. Someone had seen him with the children, reported it. In a small town like this, everything was noticed, everything was talked about. The knock came again, more insistent. Jake looked at Tommy, who had Lily wrapped in a blanket, ready to run into the night with nothing but his wooden horse clutched in one small fist. "Please, mister," Tommy whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Don't let them split us up. I'll take real good care of her. I promise. We won't be any trouble." Jake Morrison had spent 3 years telling himself he was done with complications, done with caring about anyone but himself. But looking at this brave, terrified boy who'd walked through hell to protect his sister, He knew that was over. Whatever came next, whatever the law said, whatever it cost him, he wasn't letting these children face the world alone anymore. The knock came sharp and official, cutting through the peaceful afternoon like a blade. Jake had just finished helping Tommy with a wooden puzzle while Lily napped on the couch, her color finally returning after 3 days of proper meals and care. The children had begun to trust him. Tommy's shoulders no longer hunched in constant vigilance, and Lily had even smiled that morning when Jake made funny faces over breakfast. Now that trust shattered as Tommy bolted upright, his eyes wide with the same terror Jake had seen outside Murphy's store. "Hide," Tommy whispered frantically, shaking Lily awake. "Lily, we have to hide." Jake's heart sank as he opened the door to find a professional-looking Asian woman in her 30s, clipboard in hand, accompanied by a sheriff's deputy. Her expression was kind but determined, the look of someone who'd seen too much and had learned to lead with procedure rather than emotion. "Mr. Morrison? I'm Sarah Chun, caseworker with Child Protective Services. We received a report about 2 unaccompanied minors on your property." Behind Jake, he could hear Tommy's desperate whispers as he tried to coax his sister behind the couch. The sound nearly broke Jake's heart. These children had finally begun to feel safe, and now the very system meant to protect them was their greatest fear. "Mrs. Henderson called you," Jake said, not really asking. His neighbor had been peering through her curtains all morning, disapproval obvious in every suspicious glance. "We're required to investigate any reports involving child welfare," Sarah replied gently. "May I come in?" Jake stepped aside, watching helplessly as Sarah's trained eyes took in the scene. The makeshift beds he'd created, the children's few belongings folded neatly on chairs. Tommy crouched protectively over Lily behind the furniture. "It's okay," Jake called softly to the children. "No one's going to hurt you." But Tommy shook his head violently, his 7-year-old frame trembling. "You promised," he whispered, though his voice carried across the room. "You promised we could stay together." Sarah knelt down slowly, making herself smaller, less threatening. "Hi, Tommy." "Hi, Lily. I'm Sarah. I'm here to make sure you're safe and taken care of." "We are safe," Tommy said fiercely, though tears streamed down his cheeks. "Jake takes care of us. He gives us food and reads us stories, and he fixed Lily's cough." "I can see that," Sarah said, her voice genuinely warm. "Mr. Morrison seems like a very caring person, but there are rules about where children can live, especially when they don't have parents." "Our mama and papa died," Lily said suddenly, her small voice barely audible. It was the most she'd spoken since Jake found them. "They can't come back." Sarah's professional composure cracked slightly. "I know, sweetheart. I'm so sorry. That must be very scary and sad." Jake cleared his throat. "Ms. Chun, these children have been through enough trauma. Surely there's a way to keep them here while we sort out the legal requirements." Sarah stood, pulling Jake aside while keeping the children in view. "Mr. Morrison, I can see you care about them, and frankly, they look better than most kids I encounter in these situations. But I have to follow protocol. They need to be placed with licensed foster families while we investigate." "Investigate what?" "Whether I'm fit to care for them." "Among other things, yes. Background checks, home studies, psychological evaluations. The process exists for good reasons." "And how long does this process take?" Sarah's hesitation told him everything. "Several months, typically." "Several months." Jake's voice rose, causing both children to look over anxiously. He forced himself to speak quieter. "These kids have lost everything. They need stability, not to be bounced between strangers. I understand your concern, but no, you don't." Jake's 3 years of grief and isolation suddenly crystallized into fierce protectiveness. "You see case files and procedures. I see Tommy having nightmares about losing his sister. I see Lily finally eating without fear. You want to rip them apart because of paperwork." Tommy crept closer, still holding Lily's hand. "Jake, are they taking us away?" Jake knelt down, meeting Tommy's eyes. "I'm going to fight for you, both of you. I promise." But you can't stop them today, Tommy said with heartbreaking wisdom. Can you? Before Jake could answer, Sarah spoke up. I have some discretion here. If we can arrange emergency placement with a licensed family nearby. Together, Tommy interrupted desperately. Sarah's silence was answer enough. Licensed foster families willing to take sibling pairs were rare, especially on short notice. Please, Jake said quietly, give me a chance to do this right. I'll start whatever process you need, but let them stay here while we work through it. Sarah looked between Jake and the children, her internal struggle visible. I could potentially arrange a temporary agreement if you had community references, maybe a character witness from. I can provide those, came a voice from the doorway. Pastor Williams stood there with Dr. Martinez, Jake's grief counselor from the first year after Elena's death. Sarah, isn't it? I'm Pastor Williams from Community Church. This is Dr. Martinez. We've both known Jake for years. Relief flooded through Jake. The small-town network that usually felt suffocating now offered salvation. Jake Morrison is a good man who's been through his own tragedy, Dr. Martinez said firmly. These children aren't being exploited or endangered. They're being loved. Sarah looked at her clipboard, then at the children clinging to each other, then at Jake's desperate hope. I can arrange a 48-hour emergency placement here while I expedite the paperwork. But Mr. Morrison, you'll need to begin the formal application process immediately. Background check, home study, parenting classes, everything. Whatever it takes, Jake said immediately. And Sarah continued, her voice gentler now. If the full assessment doesn't go well, the children will need to be placed in traditional foster care, potentially in separate homes if that's what's available. Tommy buried his face against Jake's shoulder. Don't let them separate us, he whispered. Please. Jake wrapped his arms around both children, feeling the weight of their trust and terror. I won't let that happen. But even as he said the words, he knew he was making a promise he might not be able to keep. The system had its own momentum, its own logic that didn't account for wooden horses or desperate love, or the way Lily had started calling him Jake Papa when she thought he wasn't listening. Sarah closed her clipboard with a decisive snap. 48 hours, Mr. Morrison. Make them count. As the caseworker and deputy left, Jake held the children close, feeling time already slipping away. Outside, Mrs. Henderson's curtains twitched again, and Jake realized their peaceful bubble had burst forever. The real fight was just beginning. The 48 hours passed like a fever dream. Jake barely slept, instead filling out forms by lamplight while the children finally rested peacefully in their makeshift beds. Background check applications, financial disclosures, personal references, each document felt like a lifeline he was desperately weaving to keep his new family together. But when Sarah Chun returned, her expression told him everything before she spoke. I'm sorry, Jake. The emergency placement has to end. I've found temporary homes for both children, but not together, Jake finished, his voice hollow. Tommy, who had been playing quietly with his wooden horse, suddenly stood rigid. No. His 7-year-old voice cracked with a terror that cut through everyone in the room. You promised we'd stay together. I tried, sweetie, Sarah said gently. The Martinez family can take you, Tommy, and they're wonderful people with a boy your age. And Mrs. Patterson is perfect for Lily. She specializes in younger children, and I don't care, Tommy screamed, the first time Jake had heard him raise his voice. Lily is my sister. I have to protect her. Lily, sensing the crisis, began crying the desperate wail of a child who understood more than she could express. She ran to Jake, climbing up his leg like a frightened kitten seeking height and safety. Jake Papa, she sobbed, using the name she'd whispered in her sleep. Don't let them take Tommy. Jake's heart shattered and reformed in that moment, hardening into something fierce and unbreakable. He knelt down, gathering both children close. Listen to me, he said firmly. This is temporary. I'm going to fight for you, for us, every single day until we're together again. Do you understand me? Tommy nodded through his tears, trying to be brave. How long? I don't know, Jake admitted. But however long it takes. The separation was brutal. Tommy went rigid when a Martinez family arrived. A kind couple with a son named Carlos who tried to interest Tommy in his baseball card collection. Tommy clutched his wooden horse and stared at Jake with eyes that held a lifetime of abandonment. Take care of Lily, he whispered as they led him away. Lily's placement was worse. Mrs. Patterson was a genuinely caring woman in her 60s who specialized in emergency care for traumatized toddlers. But when she reached for Lily, the 4-year-old became hysterical. Jake, Papa, Tommy, don't leave me. It took 3 adults to get her into the car, and Jake had to turn away from the window as they drove off, her small face pressed against the glass, still calling for him. The house felt tomb quiet afterward. Jake sat in his kitchen, staring at the children's abandoned belongings. Lily's worn stuffed rabbit, Tommy's carefully arranged collection of smooth stones from the creek. Sarah lingered awkwardly by the door. They'll be well cared for, she said softly. That's not the same thing as loved, Jake replied without looking up. I know, and for what it's worth, I believe you love them. But the system has requirements, and my job is to follow them. After Sarah left, Jake called the only lawyer he knew, Tom Bradley, who'd handled Elena's estate. Tom listened to the whole story, then sighed heavily. Jake, I'm not a family law attorney, but I know someone who is. Rebecca Santos. She's good, but I have to be honest. Single men your age don't typically get custody of unrelated children, especially when there are other options. What other options? Foster care? Group homes? These kids have been through enough. I'll call Rebecca. But you need to understand, this could take months, maybe a year. And there's no guarantee. The next weeks blurred together in a haze of appointments and assessments. Home study visits where social workers measured Jake's spare bedrooms and questioned his motives. Psychological evaluations that probed his grief over Elena and their unborn child, his capacity for parenting, his financial stability. Meanwhile, he fought for visitation rights, driving to different parts of the county to see Tommy and Lily separately. Tommy was withdrawing, speaking less each visit, his spark dimming. The Martinez family reported he barely ate and woke up screaming most nights. He keeps asking when he can see Lily, Mrs. Martinez told Jake sadly. We've explained it's complicated, but he's 7, Jake finished. All he knows is that adults keep breaking promises. Lily's situation was different, but equally heartbreaking. Mrs. Patterson reported that she'd regressed significantly, wetting the bed, refusing to speak, clinging desperately to her stuffed rabbit. During Jake's visits, she wouldn't let go of his hand. Gamma Patterson is nice, she whispered during one visit, using her word for grandmother figures. But I want to come home with you and Tommy. I'm working on it, sweetheart. I promise. But promises felt hollow when faced with the grinding machinery of bureaucracy. Rebecca Santos, the family lawyer Tom had recommended, laid out the challenges with brutal honesty. Your age works against you. They'll question how long you can actively parent. Your single status is a red flag. Your lack of parenting experience is another strike. And frankly, the fact that these children aren't legally yours yet makes everything harder. What do you mean, not legally mine? They're wards of the state. You're essentially asking to adopt 2 children with no biological connection to you, no prior relationship, and significant trauma histories. It's not impossible, but unlikely. I won't lie to you, Jake. Yes. The community rallied in ways that surprised him. Pastor Williams organized a letter-writing campaign. Dr. Martinez provided detailed reports on Jake's mental health progress. Murphy's store started a petition that grew to 3 pages of signatures. Even Mrs. Henderson, guilt-ridden over her initial phone call, wrote a glowing character reference. But the system moved at its own pace, indifferent to community support or broken hearts. The crisis came in week 6. Jake arrived at the Martinez home for his scheduled visit to find Tommy missing. He ran away 3 hours ago. Mr. Martinez explained frantically. He said he had to find Lily. The police are looking, but Jake's blood turned to ice. A 7-year-old boy, alone, trying to navigate a county he barely knew to reach his 4-year-old sister. It was Jake's worst nightmare realized. They found Tommy 2 hours later, walking along the highway with his wooden horse tucked under his arm, tears streaming down his face, but his jaw set with determination that would have been admirable if it wasn't so dangerous. "I have to get to Lily," he told the deputy who found him. "She needs me. Nobody else understands her dreams." That night, as Jake held Tommy during an emergency visitation at the police station, he realized the system wasn't just failing these children, it was destroying them. And something had to change, even if it meant risking everything he'd worked for in court. "Tommy," he whispered as the boy finally fell asleep against his shoulder. "I'm done playing by their rules. We're going to be a family, whatever it takes." The custody hearing was scheduled for the following month. Win or lose, Jake knew it would determine not just where Tommy and Lily lived, but whether they'd survive the process with their spirits intact. The real fight was about to begin. The courthouse steps felt like a mountain Jake had to climb. Behind him, half the town seemed to have gathered. Pastor Williams, Dr. Martinez, the Murphy family from the general store, even old Frank who ran the gas station and claimed he didn't get involved in other people's business. Their presence was both comforting and terrifying. So many people believed in him, but what if it wasn't enough? Rebecca Santos met him at the entrance, her professional confidence masking what Jake suspected was shared anxiety. "Remember," she said quietly, "Judge Henderson, no relation to your neighbor, is fair but traditional. She believes in stable family structures and established procedures. We need to show her that sometimes love creates its own stability." Inside the courtroom, Jake's heart nearly stopped. Tommy sat in the front row beside his temporary guardian, Mrs. Martinez, while Lily was across the aisle with Mrs. Patterson. The 4-year-old kept turning to look for Tommy, confusion written across her small face when she couldn't see him clearly. Tommy sat rigid, his wooden horse clutched in his lap, staring straight ahead with the 1,000-yard stare of a child who'd learned not to hope too hard. They hadn't been allowed to see each other in 2 weeks, not since Tommy's escape attempt. The distance between them seemed to stretch across an ocean. Judge Helen Henderson entered. A woman in her 50s with silver hair and the no-nonsense bearing of someone who'd spent decades making impossible decisions about children's lives. Her eyes swept the packed courtroom with surprise. "This is quite a turnout for a custody hearing," she observed. "Mr. Morrison, I see you have significant community support." Jake stood. "Yes, Your Honor. These people have watched me grow, watched me grieve, and watched me find purpose again through Tommy and Lily." The state's attorney, David Walsh, was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who treated each case like a mathematical equation. "Your Honor, while Mr. Morrison's community support is admirable, we must focus on the children's best interests. The state has identified several qualified foster families willing to provide long-term care." Separately, Rebecca interrupted. "The state solution separates these siblings who've already lost their parents. If necessary, yes. Finding a single family able to handle both children's trauma histories is challenging. But they don't have trauma histories," Jake said suddenly, standing up despite Rebecca's restraining hand. "They have grief. They have fear. They have each other. And until you separated them, they were healing." Judge Henderson fixed him with a stern look. "Mr. Morrison, you'll have your chance to speak." Mr. Walsh continued. Walsh outlined the case methodically. Jake's age, 45, single status, lack of formal parenting experience, and the children's need for professional therapeutic intervention in specialized homes. It sounded reasonable, logical, and completely devoid of understanding about what Tommy and Lily actually needed. The state also has concerns about Mr. Morrison's capacity for long-term care. At 45, by the time these children reach adulthood, He'll be in his 60s. What happens if his health fails? If he can't provide active parenting? Rebecca stood for their defense. Your Honor, Mr. Morrison's age brings stability and maturity. His ranch provides space, fresh air, and meaningful work that teaches responsibility. His community support network is extraordinary. Most importantly, these children chose him. She called their witnesses. Pastor Williams spoke about Jake's character and his growth through grief. Dr. Martinez testified to his mental health stability and capacity for healing. Murphy testified to Jake's kindness and the way Tommy had instinctively trusted him. Mrs. Patterson, surprisingly, spoke about Lily's regression in foster care and how she only brightened when talking about Jake Papa. It was Tommy's turn. Judge Henderson had Tommy approach the witness chair, but instead of sitting, he walked directly to Jake, climbing into his lap with the natural trust of a child seeking his father. Tommy, Judge Henderson said gently, I need to ask you some questions. The adults here want to make sure you and Lily are safe and happy. Do you understand? Tommy nodded solemnly. Yes, ma'am, but we were safe with Jake. We were happy until they took us away. Tell me about living with Mr. Morrison. He makes pancakes shaped like animals, Tommy said quietly. He reads to Lily even though she falls asleep. He fixed my wooden horse when the year broke. He doesn't get mad when I have dreams about Mama and Papa. What kind of dreams? Scary ones. But Jake sits with me until they go away. He says it's okay to miss them and be sad and love them and still be happy with new people too. Judge Henderson's expression softened slightly. That's very wise. What do you want, Tommy? I want to go home with Jake and Lily. I want us to be a family. Real families don't give up on each other, even when it's hard. From across the courtroom, Lily suddenly stood up on her chair. Tommy, she called out, her voice clear and desperate. Tommy, I can't see you. Mrs. Patterson tried to quiet her, but Lily was having none of it. With the determination only a 4-year-old possesses, she climbed down from her chair and ran across the courtroom toward her brother. Lily, Tommy scrambled down from Jake's lap, meeting his sister halfway. They collided in a fierce hug that made half the courtroom reach for tissues. Order, Judge Henderson said, but her voice lacked conviction. She watched as Jake knelt down, gathering both children close. They fit together like puzzle pieces. Tommy's protective arm around Lily, Lily's complete trust in both her brother and Jake, Jake's gentle strength encompassing them both. This is highly irregular, Walsh protested. Yes, it is. Judge Henderson agreed, but she didn't separate them. Mr. Morrison approached the bench with the children. Jake walked forward, a child holding each hand. At the judge's bench, she leaned down to their level. Lily, sweetheart, do you know what's happening here? The grown-ups are deciding if we can go home, Lily whispered. And where is home? Without hesitation, Lily pointed at Jake. With Jake, Papa, and Tommy. We're family. Judge Henderson looked at Jake for a long moment. Mr. Morrison, these children have endured more loss than most adults. If I grant you custody, are you prepared for the challenges? The therapy they'll need? The questions about their parents they'll ask for years to come? Your Honor, I lost my wife and unborn child 3 years ago. I thought my life was over. These children didn't just need rescue. They rescued me. I'm not perfect and I'm not traditional, but I love them completely. And sometimes that's enough to build a family on. Judge Henderson returned to her bench. The courtroom silent except for Lily's quiet humming as she played with Tommy's wooden horse. After what felt like hours, she spoke. In all my years on this bench, I've seen many cases where we followed procedure perfectly and still failed the children. I've also learned that families aren't always created by biology. Sometimes they're created by choice, by love, by simply showing up when it matters most. She paused, looking directly at the children. Tommy, Lily, Mr. Morrison. The court grants permanent custody to Jake Morrison, with a 6-month review period and mandatory family counseling. The courtroom erupted. Tommy burst into tears, not of sadness, but of relief so profound it shook his small frame. Lily clapped her hands like it was Christmas morning. Jake couldn't speak at all, overwhelmed by gratitude and the weight of responsibility he'd just accepted. As people crowded around them with congratulations, Jake felt Tommy tug on his shirt. "Jake," Tommy whispered, "are we really a family now? Like forever family?" Jake knelt down, meeting both children's eyes. "Forever and always. Nothing will ever separate us again." Outside the courthouse, as the celebration continued around them, Tommy carefully placed his wooden horse in Jake's hands. "I don't need to sell this anymore," he said simply. "I have everything I need." Jake accepted the small toy with the reverence it deserved. Not just a wooden horse, but a symbol of desperation transformed into hope, of a family born from the courage to ask a stranger for help. They were going home, together. 1 year later, Jake Morrison stood in the same spot outside Murphy's General Store where his life had changed forever. But everything was different now. The man who had once moved through his days like a ghost, hollowed out by grief and isolation, now carried himself with purpose. The children who had once been desperate and afraid now ran ahead of him, healthy and laughing, their voices carrying the music of security. "Jake, Papa, can we get the good cookies today?" Lily called back to him, her 4-year-old vocabulary now rich with new words and endless questions. The tiny, silent child who had barely spoken was now a chatterbox who narrated her entire day and asked why about everything from why grass was green to why people needed sleep. "We'll see, sweetheart," Jake called back, watching her spin in circles on the sidewalk, her sundress twirling around her like a yellow flower. She'd grown 3 inches in the past year, and her cheeks had filled out with the healthy roundness of a well-fed, well-loved child. Tommy, now 8, had changed even more dramatically. The fierce protectiveness was still there. He still instinctively checked on Lily's whereabouts and held her hand in crowds. But it was balanced now with age-appropriate joy. He played baseball with Carlos Martinez, excelled in 2nd grade, and had learned to trust other adults to help care for his sister. His teachers said he was exceptionally empathetic, always the first to comfort a crying classmate or include a lonely child in games. The wooden horse now sat in a place of honor on the mantle at home, carefully preserved but no longer clutched in desperate hands. Tommy had explained to Jake that it represented before they had a real home, before they had security, before they knew what it felt like to be chosen rather than abandoned. As they entered the store, Jake noticed immediately the thin woman standing by the bread aisle, her clothes clean but worn, her face carrying the particular exhaustion of someone trying to make impossible decisions. Beside her, a girl of about 6 stood quietly, too quietly, with a careful stillness Jake recognized from his own children's early days. The woman was counting change in her palm, her lips moving silently as she calculated. Jake watched her pick up a loaf of bread, then put it back and select a smaller, cheaper one. The little girl tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered something. The woman's face tightened with the pain of having to say no to her child. Jake was about to approach when he felt Tommy's hand slip into his. "Jake, Papa," Tommy said quietly, his 8-year-old voice carrying wisdom beyond his years. "That little girl looks hungry." Jake looked down at his son, because that's what Tommy was now, legally and in every way that mattered, and saw not the desperate child who had once begged strangers to buy his toy, but a boy who understood both need and abundance. "What do you think we should do?" Jake asked, curious about how Tommy would handle the situation. Without hesitation, Tommy walked over to where Lily was selecting cookies from the bakery case. He whispered something in her ear, and she nodded solemnly. Together, they approached the woman and her daughter. "Excuse me," Tommy said politely, his small voice clear and confident. "My sister and I were wondering if your daughter might like to share some cookies with us. We always get too many." The woman looked startled, then wary, the automatic defensiveness of someone who'd learned to be suspicious of charity. But Tommy's genuine smile and Lily's eager nodding seemed to disarm her. "That's very kind," she said carefully, "but we're fine. Thank you." "Mama," the little girl whispered, "I'm really hungry." The woman's composure cracked slightly. Jake stepped forward then, recognizing the moment when pride and need collided. "Ma'am, I'm Jake Morrison. These are my children, Tommy and Lily. We're just finishing our shopping, but we always end up with more groceries than we can carry. Would you be willing to help us out by taking some off our hands?" It was Tommy who had taught him this approach, how to offer help in a way that preserved dignity. The boy who had once been too proud to ask for assistance until desperation overcame him now understood how to give others the gift of accepting help gracefully. The woman, who introduced herself as Maria Santos, eventually accepted their offer. As Jake loaded extra groceries in her cart, he noticed Tommy and Lily had taken her daughter, Sophia, to the toy aisle. They returned with Sophia clutching a small stuffed rabbit, similar to the one Lily had treasured during her darkest days. "We bought it with our allowance money," Tommy explained to Maria, who looked overwhelmed by their generosity. "Everyone needs something special to hold when things are scary." As they parted ways outside the store, Maria with tears in her eyes and Sophia with her new rabbit, Jake felt the profound satisfaction of watching his children understand the cycle of kindness. They had been lifted up when they needed it most, and now they were learning to extend that same grace to others. "Tommy," Jake said as they loaded their truck, "do you remember what you said to me that first day outside this store?" Tommy thought for a moment. "I asked you to buy my wooden horse because Lily was hungry. And what would you say to that little boy now if you could go back?" Tommy considered this seriously, his face scrunched in concentration. "I'd tell him that asking for help isn't shameful. I'd tell him that some strangers become family. And I'd tell him that Lily was going to be okay, better than okay." Lily, who had been quietly listening while strapped in her car seat, added her own wisdom. "I'd tell me not to be scared of Jake, Papa. I'd say he makes really good pancakes." Jake laughed, the sound carrying all the joy he'd never thought he'd feel again. As they drove home through the Montana countryside, past fields where cattle grazed peacefully and mountains stood eternal against the sky, he marveled at how completely his life had transformed. The ranch house that had once felt like a mausoleum now bustled with life. Lily's artwork covered the refrigerator. Tommy's baseball glove sat by the door. Bicycles and toys dotted the yard. The silence that had once threatened to consume Jake had been replaced by the beautiful chaos of childhood. Arguments over whose turn it was to feed the chickens. Bedtime stories that stretched long past bedtime. The patter of small feet racing through hallways. That evening, as Jake tucked both children into their beds, real beds now, in rooms they decorated themselves, Tommy asked the question that had become their nightly ritual. "Jake, Papa, tell us the story about the day we became a family." Jake settled into the chair between their beds, Lily's stuffed rabbit in her arms, Tommy's wooden horse on his nightstand where it watched over their dreams. "Once upon a time," Jake began, "there was a little boy who was braver than he knew, and a little girl who was stronger than she seemed, and a man who thought his story was over, but discovered it was just beginning." As he told their story, their true story, the one they'd lived together, Jake understood finally that healing didn't mean forgetting the past or pretending pain hadn't existed. Healing meant learning to carry love alongside loss, to build new joy without diminishing old memories. Elena would have loved these children, he knew. She would have been proud of the man he'd become through loving them. The grief would always be part of him, but it no longer defined him. Instead, it had deepened his capacity for compassion and taught him to treasure each ordinary, extraordinary day with his family. Outside, the Montana sky stretched endless and star-filled, promising tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. Inside, two children fell asleep to the sound of their father's voice telling them they were loved, they were safe, they were home. The wooden horse kept its silent vigil, no longer a symbol of desperation, but a reminder of miracles, of how sometimes, when we have the courage to ask for help and the wisdom to offer it, strangers become family, broken hearts become whole, and love multiplies infinitely when shared. In the morning, there would be pancakes shaped like animals and questions about everything in the beautiful chaos of raising children. There would be little league games and school plays, scraped knees and hurt feelings, proud moments and worried nights. There would be all the messy, imperfect, absolutely perfect pieces that make a family. But tonight there was peace. Tonight there was love. Tonight there was home. And that was everything.